Good morning, everybody. Time is 10 to 10. I'm sorry we got started a little later than what was scheduled or announced. Ran into a little bit of logistic problem with parking and sort of a lot of other issues. This is a continuation of the meeting that was started yesterday at 10:30. We discussed a number of items yesterday, went into closed session late in the afternoon, reported back at around 4:30, 4:45 yesterday, and we're going to continue on with the items that are on the agenda. Before we get going, is there any announcement by staff for us to consider today? No? Okay.
Did you want to note that there's two commissioners out of the country who will not be participating?
Let's do a roll call
All right.
for the official record.
Commissioner Aguirre?
Here.
Commissioner Baraba?
Here.
Commissioner Blanco? She's out of the country. Commissioner Dye?
Here.
Commissioner DeGiulio?
Here.
Commissioner Filkins-Weber?
Here.
Commissioner Forbes?
Here.
Commissioner Gambles Malloy? She's out of the country. Commissioner Kuo? Commissioner Kuo? Commissioner Antai? Commissioner Parvenu?
Here.
Commissioner Rai?
Here.
Commissioner Ward?
Here.
Commissioner Yao?
Here. I trust we still have a quorum. All right, thank you. Before we start the item on the agenda, let me open up the mic to the audience, to the public. If there are anything that you would like to speak to the commission on or off the agenda today, please come up to the microphone.
Let me just mention one thing that a question I had yesterday about when the Secretary of State needs the maps, and a woman from the office mentioned that they need 158 days before the election the maps for the people who want to file signatures in lieu of filing fees. So 158 days. There's presidential primary February 5th. I don't know if the state primary will be then, but if it was, that would put you in September. So really serious deadline there to look at. Okay. These are some comments about holding public hearings probably into the future that you may be looking at farther in the future. So this is sort of public comment maybe on not that you'll be covering today, but potential. And I'm aware that you haven't set limits yet, so if I seem to go too long, just say, why don't you just take a little break and not continue. My name is Brian Lawson. I teach political science at Santa Monica College. On the hearings, I would suggest that you do it by population. Census numbers say about 37 million people in California. So if you had 37 hearings, try to hit 1 million per hearing. In more sparsely covered areas, you might need to have more hearings because they are more spread out. Different hearings might have different questions. So in sparsely populated areas, it might be about stitching counties together. Densely populated areas, how to cut counties and cities apart so as not to divide communities of interest. Something mentioned in the trainings, people might come up and give impassioned statements about their neighborhood community of interest, but then not give geographic information, streets, things like that. Best case scenario, have computers there so they can look up their census blocks, things like that. Identifying all community of interest, very hard in California, so you might want to have a priority. First, community of interest that protected by the Voting Rights Act. Second, community of interest that should not be, that might be divided, those that cross city or county lines. And then third, all other community of interest. Just one idea, just one idea. You can have your own. Then you'll have other types of hearings about proposed maps. And there you want to probably have a very specific process for getting input. Again, you can't determine what people will say, public input, people can say anything, but you could give them suggestions about what might be most useful. So if you think about the public comments that you asked for when you put out the slate for comment on December 10th, you got back a lot of comments. I think there were 110 comments, but a lot of those just promoted or criticized one individual. And you might find that you would have similar situation with maps where people would criticize or you know, something about one district, but you're looking at a whole map. And so you would say, oh, you know, if you don't like this district, your comment will be more useful if you tell us how to change the other districts around it, because you can't change a district without bumping other districts, and why you think your district map is better than the one the commission has put out, because then you might get comment that you can really use. Legislature and the governor, you might need to hit them up for more money. One way to convince them to give you more money might be to say, hey, look, we can only hold hearings in a few areas, but if you give us more money, then more districts will be covered. So you know, you might be able to pitch that. Written and electronically submitted public comments might be helpful. So a process for that, a very sort of clear, specific thing, not just kind of post anything on the web, but you know, how would you make the comments more directed for you? You'll hire experts, hopefully, to help you with this process, and I would encourage you to really get those experts to design a system on the front end that will give you useful comments and information. So, you know, think about the process that they suggest. Is it just going to be, you know, 3 people go down to Fresno and just show up? Or are you going to be more specific about how you're going to get comment there and things like that? Redistricting taking place throughout the country, throughout the country, but throughout the state also. Cities, counties, school boards, every place where they do district rather than at-large elections, all doing redistricting. You can piggyback on them. They will want to piggyback on you. Something to think about, you know, Commissioner Aguirre, Commissioner Parvenu, who are people who are, you know, really involved in city and county government, and others also, are resources that will be really great in that area of, you know, all these other redistrictings that are going on. Some of them are almost of the size of your district. Some of them are even larger. The LA County supervisorial districts, about 2 million people. Districts get smaller from there, but they're kind of on the same size. Their time frame is a little different because they have elections at different times, but it's something that you really want to you know, look into. You've already had some people from San Jose reaching out, the 3rd largest city in California, the 6th largest county, Santa Clara. You know, pick up on these people. Creative, effective people in government, you know, need to work with all levels of government. You have great representation here from, you know, presidential appointees, you know, to every level. And so, you know, take advantage of them. Again, the Bureau of Audits has tilled the field, got 30,000 people interested. If you can go back and get them, that would be great. And when you hold your hearing to identify public interest, the cities, counties, and school boards will benefit from that. And so I think you can make a pitch, hey, you know, you've got a city council chamber with, you know, video setup. Could we use it at a lower price or whatever like that? So you want to reach out to all the opportunities that you have out there. So thank you very much. Good luck.
Thank you, Mr. Lawson. All right, seeing no one else approaching the microphone, I'll bring the discussion back to the commission. The next item on the agenda is item number 3, the commission governance time for comments, establishing advisory committees, per diem guidelines, and other governance matters. I thought it would be appropriate to address that item as our first item, and then perhaps immediately after that is a discussion on schedules for future meetings. And I think that will allow us to better understand the events that are coming up. Are there any other suggestions in terms of where we get started and how we should proceed? If not, let's go ahead and start item number 3. Let's talk about the committee or commission governance. It's a broad topic. If any commissioner has any one area that we want to start, would you go ahead and propose it?
As we have done previously in, I think, our last public hearings before we had the full commission, is we were considering a motion for limitation on public comments in order for us to work more effectively. We certainly appreciate public comments, and I would ask that we consider, at least initially for our meetings, to have a motion to limit that for this time. I don't know if it's a motion that would pertain to all of our meetings in the future, or and maybe a reminder if we should be doing it at each open public hearing. But I would suggest that we move forward with at least some procedural matter such as that.
Cynthia?
Do you have a suggestion? Should
Oh.
we do 3 to 5 minutes? Because we can almost extend it if.
Sure. My recommendation would be 3 minutes. That's what I'm used to in my own public hearings when I attend City Council.
Second?
Yes.
Yes, it's, I think 3 minutes is quite limited. I think 3 minutes is quite limiting in that, you know, it's true that we want to get as many people up before us as possible, but there will be some communities where the individuals will not be, I think, that numerous. So I would opt for a 3 to 5 based on the number of speakers that would be available to present evidence. And if the numbers are numerous, then you know you could set that 3-minute time limit. However, given the count of individuals in the audience that want to address the commission, it would be good to give them a little bit of extra time so that they can, you know, so we can get the best information possible. So.
Are you interested in making an alternate motion?
Well, I would say 3 minutes, max 5 minutes, something like that. So.
We're tailoring this motion to just these hearings now, correct? This isn't universal for all of our meetings. That's the way I understood the initial motion. Is that correct?
Well, if I might respond, I understood the motion to be a set standard that would apply to hearings up and down the state.
Yeah, that was the intent of my motion, primarily because it is a procedural matter that seems to be lost with all of our other important business. And I think if we set a standard at this point, and I would gladly amend my motion, even though I think I can do that, based on, well, unless there's further comment, I think Stanley has something to say first. Commissioner Flores.
Right. Stan is fine. No, just a couple of comments about public comment. I think there's 2 kinds of public comment that we're going to be perhaps going to be hearing. One is going to be a general public comment. I mean, they don't want to talk about the specific information they want to give us on their community of interest, but they have a general comment. Those, I think, should be kept to a shorter period of time, and there I think the 3 minutes applies. I think the other, I mean, I think the other we would tailor to the number of people who want to speak. I mean, if you have 200 people who want to speak and you really want to get through them, you may only be able to do 2 minutes, and that's just the reality. On the other hand, if there's 10, then you have a longer opportunity to speak. Another thing which I think perhaps the executive director could facilitate was that in a number of instances, I think we're going to find where, if you will, communities of interest want to speak for a group of people. And so in those instances where one person wants to speak for 10 or 20, that we provide more time for that group to speak, because it's actually a more efficient way of doing it. And so I think that needs to be, that concept needs to be incorporated. We don't want to force only individuals to speak for 3 or 5 minutes, when in fact someone represents a significant portion of the community, and they have a more extensive presentation to make.
Mr. Kerr?
Yes, I would concur with and agree with the comments that were just presented. Certainly, a standard for organizational presentations. I can think of several advocacy organizations up and down the state that would probably have more demographic and geographic input than perhaps the individual, and that would necessitate, you know, a longer time period, perhaps PowerPoint presentations, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that that if we could incorporate that within this motion, that would be good, or else leave the option open for organizations to schedule themselves ahead of time with the commission, so that we could allocate a certain number of minutes that might be available to them above and beyond what that would be available to individuals.
My comment on this is, you brought up PowerPoint presentation. Generally, that should be agendized as compared to be including that as part of the general comment, because that can easily get out of hand in terms of technical difficulties, in terms of the duration. On the city council, we do have means to go beyond the standard requirement. For example, if any one of the commission asks the speaker a question, then that in essence shuts down the clock, okay, and you can go as long as you want. So the standard doesn't apply in that situation, and also at any instant in time, any of the commissioners can propose that we waive that limit for any particular speakers. So the guideline is meant to be just that. If there's no real exception or real justification to it, we try to adhere to the guideline. And also another way of doing it is to reserve a block of time for public comments. So if the total of all the comments, let's say, exceeded whatever the time limit is, half an hour, then the remaining of the public comment will take place at the end of the day or end of the meeting, as compared to allowing that to impact the schedule for our meeting. So there are a number of ways that we can do it, in addition to just setting a time limit for each of the speakers.
It seems to me that most of what we're going to be getting, though, is going to be public comment when we're on the road. That's going to be the essence of the meeting. And so, I mean, setting aside the time is not necessary, because the whole meeting is basically public comment.
Yeah.
So I think what I would suggest is that we adhere to, at least basically to a 3-minute limit, as was proposed, with a recognition that depending on the number of speakers, that number can be increased, and that we would ask that the executive director, when he's setting these meetings up, solicit in advance comments or requests from groups that would like to address this for a longer period of time, but probably not more than 15 minutes. I think that then you begin to have an individual group dominate whatever meeting is, you know, taking place.
Is that an alternate motion to what Commissioner Weber had proposed?
It could be. Yes.
Would anybody like to second
Incorporate mine.
I'll second that motion.
Mr. Forbes? All right, we'll have to vote on the alternate motion first before we vote on the initial motion.
Could
Any-
we restate the
Yeah,
motion?
All right.
Okay. The motion is that the basic standard for individual comments will be 3 minutes. That amount of time is subject to be expanded depending on the number of people, individuals who wish to speak to us. The executive director, at the time the meetings are set up, will find a mechanism to solicit groups who would like to speak as a group, And those presentations could be up to as much as 15 minutes, but not more. That's the motion.
It's been,
Let me just ask a question. I have no opinion here. Did you intend to mean the executive director or the chair?
The executive director, because when the meeting, this is before the meeting takes place, when you're
Okay,
developing
that's
who's
fine.
going to come speak at the meeting.
Just so that was clear.
Yes, that was or whoever the executive director has do this, if it's him or her or staff.
Within that motion, I think we should define what number constitutes a group. 10, 15, 20, what would, I think of that motion, just modify it a bit to define the minimum number of persons that would be designated as a group.
I think at this point, I would leave that to the discretion of the executive director, because I think that is a very hard thing to quantify at this time, personally.
Now I remembered what my question was. So any of these time limits are subject to waiver at the time, including your group time, correct?
I mean, all time limits are subject to the waiver of the people holding the hearing. I will say, however, that I don't, I would discourage presentation longer than 15 minutes. That's my personal experience.
I think the most important thing is that we're trying to establish a standard guideline. And so I think, 3 minutes as a standard guideline for individuals. Obviously, if the room is empty, then it's subject to waiver. If there are 200 people in the room, it's subject to waiver. But we just want to give the public some sense of being succinct because we want to allow for a maximum number of comments possible whenever we do gather. I do think the modification here with the idea of groups, organizations that might have more substantive presentation, I think that's a good rule of thumb, but I also think it's, definitely something that should be agendized if they're going to be doing PowerPoints.
And I would add that it's not something that we've already done here in these hearings, but that statement should be written and it should be read at the beginning of every hearing, and perhaps before any continued meetings here, where you would inform the public about what the public comment guidelines would apply.
all right, the alternate motion has been moved and second. Are we ready to take a vote on it? This is the procedure. If the alternate motion fails, then we would go back to the original motion of what Commissioner Weber had proposed without the additions or the modification that were proposed by Mr. Forbes. So we're voting on the alternate motion at this point in time. Let's do a voice vote.
Commissioner Aguirre?
Yes.
Commissioner Baraba?
Yes.
Commissioner Blanco? Commissioner Dye?
Yes.
Commissioner DeGiulio?
Yes.
Commissioner Filkins Weber?
Yes.
Commissioner Forbes?
Yes?
Commissioner Galambos Malloy? Commissioner Quo? Commissioner Antai?
Aye.
Commissioner Parvenu?
Yes.
Commissioner Rye?
Yes.
Commissioner Ward?
Yes.
Commissioner Yao?
Yes. So it's unanimous, and that will be our standard from this point on. And we probably should have such a statement on our website for future references as well. All right, next item on the commission governance. Would anybody like to bring up a discussion topic?
I would like to propose that it's fairly cumbersome to do the business of the commission and with 14 people each time. So I would like to propose a subcommittee, advisory subcommittee structure. There are several functions that I think are fairly obvious, and we can discuss if this is the exact composition or not. But I would suggest one committee kind of be a a finance and administration committee to deal with managing our limited budget and resources and working closely with the executive director on getting contracts done, et cetera. Another one should be a technical advisory committee that will deal with matters such as selecting what mapping software we use, which consultants we might want to hire to deal with the technical matters of redistricting. An outreach committee that will, of course, all of us will be participating in outreach efforts, but one that actually does the planning of it in conjunction with staff to figure out how many we're going to do, what they're going to look like, where they're going to be held, et cetera, and to, most importantly, develop a schedule for the public hearings. A legal committee that will probably work closely with counsel, including helping to hire counsel, to deal with all of the legal issues around redistricting. And finally, a public information committee that would work closely with our public affairs officer, making sure that we're consistent in how we communicate with the public.
Commissioner Dye, would you care to elaborate as to what your vision of a commission is? Maximum number of membership, how often do they meet? And
Yes, I would propose, given the structure of the commission, that that there be a minimum number of 3, a representative of the Democratic Party, the Republican Party, and someone from Decline to State or other. And that in terms of maximum, I think it becomes, it becomes kind of unwieldy when you get beyond 6 people. It kind of defeats the purpose of having a smaller working group. But then again, I don't know if we need to be as hardcore about the maximum. My feeling is this is a volunteer gig for all of us, and if people are interested and available and have the time and want to contribute in, multiple different committees, I think I would welcome that. I would just say that as a practical matter, it becomes more difficult to meet. We clarified yesterday with council that any of these committees are also subject to Bagley-Keene requirements with advance notice, 14-day notice. Well, actually, I'm not clear whether it's 14 days or 10. So maybe you could clarify that.
Just to be clear, we went through this yesterday. If you have 3 or more members of a committee, you're subject to Bagley-Keene. If you have 2, you're not. If you have a committee that you delegate to, and that hasn't been mentioned yet, but if they have delegated powers, as long as there's 2 or more people, they're subject to Bagley-Keene. So that's just something for you to consider. It's obviously up to you, and there's real logistical advantages to having committees of 2 people, but they may not satisfy what you wanted to get done. Does that answer the question?
Well, the Act, the Voters First Act, has a longer notice period, as I recall. 14
Yeah,
days.
I'm not clear. I don't think the Act is clear that the 14 days would apply to a committee. I think you'd be well served to get as much notice as you possibly can in 14 days whenever you could.
Right.
It's just not clear that that a committee is, what is clear is that the committee is subject to Bagley-Keene. Whether the committee is subject to the 14-day notice, I'm not sure. You have to sort of think in terms of policy reasons you might want to do that, but that's up to you.
Yeah, so there might be a little more flexibility in terms of the notice period. Obviously, if we can give more notice, we should. But I think there's another question as to whether, like the full commission, whether we would live stream all of the committee meetings as well. I don't know if that's necessary, but at some point it becomes extremely difficult for us to get business done if we can't meet in smaller groups to work out a lot of the details. I do believe the Voters First Act does not allow us to delegate powers to any subcommittee. So these would all be, when I'm proposing advisory subcommittees that would kind of do a lot of the legwork and consider options and alternatives and present it to the full commission, and we would vote on it as a full commission.
Question on the logistics of the meeting. Can, for example, phone conference be acceptable in such a meeting?
Well, again, you're subject to Bagley-Keene, so if you're on the phone, you have to be at a place that's accessible to the public, and the public can participate. There's no limit because it's a committee that you can't do it that way. But, you know, whenever you anticipate one or more members of a body being on the phone, then you have those logistics to think of.
I'm inclined, I mean, I think, and not just for this purpose, I think it would be useful for our soon-to-be hired executive director to identify in both Northern and Southern California a place where we can video conference rather than fly back and forth to have a meeting in Sacramento or in Southern California, to have a place where we can sit down and the public has access to, but that we can talk and see one another, you know, through video cameras and have the subcommittee meeting that way. I think it'd be a lot more efficient, cheaper.
Mhm.
And surely that exists.
Yeah, and I think as long as it's noticed.
Exactly.
Then it would be fine. I'm just thinking logistically, we have so much work to get done right now, and of course, we weren't able to notice the public on committee meetings since they were just proposed. But I think it would be useful for us to form these committees now, figure out who's interested in serving on which committees. We obviously have many commissioners with multiple skills and varying levels of availability, which I think is fine because we're all going to participate, you know, I know, to the extent possible in the public hearings. Whether, you know, people want to be part of the planning of that for the subcommittee, I think is an individual choice. But I think we should see if we have the kind of makeup that we need for these subcommittees, and then basically be able to give staff some direction so we can start the public notice, because if we will go with 14 days, the clock is ticking.
I do think these are good categories.
Commissioner Gary?
Yes, I know it was suggested, and I thought it was a great idea that we use the UC and CSU system and the community college system, which are already, I think most of them are wired for not only video conferencing, but for live streaming as well. Certainly, there are some communities around the state who may have very minimal contact with the higher education system, and that might not be applicable if we're outreaching to them. So in that regard, then we would go to what I would term community-friendly sites where certain communities kind of congregate and feel comfortable with. And it might be that local elementary schools and public high schools and community centers might be a better venue for that. But given the limited resources that we have, I think that we should take advantage of the UC-CSU community college system as venues, given that we can probably get those free of charge. And another very good suggestion I thought was that that would allow us to engage the student community, and it becomes kind of a learning opportunity as well. You know, in addition to giving them an opportunity to weigh in on the future of California.
All right, it's been proposed that we have 5, is that the right number? Subcommittees as identified by Commissioner Dye. Are there any further suggestions instead of in terms of increasing or decreasing from this quantity 5 at this point in time?
I just want to clarify that I think the commission should feel free to form ad hoc committees as we need. So these are just some that I think might be ongoing.
But what's on the floor right now is the initial 5, right? Okay.
My assumption in looking at these subcommittee categories is that any one of us can serve on multiple committees, correct? Okay.
As much as you have time and interest and ability to contribute.
I think these 5 are excellent suggestions to start off with.
I think it makes this process much more manageable and allows us and staff and the public to have more of a face instead of 12, 14 people. This will really provide, I think, a little more access and a little more efficiency in the process, and particularly under tight deadlines is what we need right now. So, thank you, Commissioner Dye.
Any additional thought or comments on the subcommittee governance structure?
I would move that we establish these 5 subcommittees for the commission.
Second.
All right, let's move in second. Let me open the floor mic to anybody that's in the audience who may be interested in commenting to the commission on the proposal of having initially 5 subcommittees to handle the workload that we have. All right, we'll bring the discussion back to the commission. Are there any further discussion? If not, then we'll go to a vote. All right, let's have a roll call, please.
Yes.
Commissioner Baraba?
Yes.
Commissioner Blanco? Commissioner Dye?
Yes.
Commissioner DeGiulio?
Yes.
Commissioner Filkins Weber?
Yes.
Commissioner Forbes?
Yes.
Commissioner Galumbo Malloy? Commissioner Quo? Commissioner Antai?
Aye.
Commissioner Parvenu?
Aye.
Commissioner Rye?
Yes.
Commissioner Ward?
Yes.
Commissioner Yao?
Yes. So again, a unanimous vote on this item. Thank you. Would anybody like to propose the next topic?
Yes, I would like to talk about one because it's probably one we've all had to, or at least most of us had to address at one point or another, is the question of media relations. I mean, I know I've gotten several requests to go on the radio and be interviewed, and I've declined them pending a discussion by the commission as to what we should say or whether we should do it or just how you want to handle that. And so I just wanted to raise that as, you know, as an issue.
We're going to have a public information committee soon.
Yes, but I don't know, we have to get, by the time they have 14 days notice, it might be a month before they're ready to, you know, so I just wanted to raise the issue. How do people feel about that? I mean, my sense is, is that so long as all we say is what's been said publicly, and we just use it as another venue, and the procedures that we're talking about, no substance, then I think, you know, we're probably okay. But I just wanted to see what other folks had to say, or just sigh.
That's the approach I've used when I've been called. I said, look, all I can talk to you about is what's already been done, and I can't project what's going to be done. That usually turns off the interview.
But we must also be conscientious of the fact that any individual that may be considering contact with the media be concerned about the type of information that may be related to you other than just questioning. Each commission member must keep in mind that you cannot accept information concerning redistricting outside of a public hearing. So to the extent in which a media member may try and provide you information for further comment, to just keep in mind that you must refrain from engaging in that or even considering the information that's brought to you. And when that happens in a verbal form, that's a little more precarious, but keep that in mind as well.
I guess I would venture to say that I think that it's probably better for us to err on the side of caution. It doesn't mean that we don't have to. Individuals may not have to, excuse me, be involved with radio or newspaper, but I think if there's ever an issue, I've been inclined to err on the side of politely declining. I think we represent the larger face of the commission, and again, for me personally, I've taken that tact. I think that other individuals may be a little more eloquent than myself, so might be able to navigate those intricacies that that have been mentioned. But it's kind of a tricky line, I suppose. The perception is everything, and I think that sometimes we don't have control if someone else is providing us information or asking us questions that might put us in an awkward position.
And it just occurred to me that you might want to, if approach, say we have because of the rules, we are putting together a process
Yeah.
to to allow us to do a better job of communicating through the press. And then that way, it doesn't sound like we're trying to hide, which I don't,
Yeah.
that's not our intent.
We can make reference to the fact that we've created a subcommittee that has not yet met, but that will be handling media contacts.
During the month of December, I think a number of us try a number of different approaches in addressing this media issue. I think one that I found somewhat effective is at the conclusion of a formal meeting such as this to come together, or maybe we can even do it while we're in session, come up with a press release type of format with bullet points. So those are the things that we should touch upon whenever we talk to the media, is to get the latest information to them. So at least that will address the completeness of the message. And one additional thought I have, this is strictly a personal thought, it has not been proposed or discussed with anybody else, is perhaps coming again on a very regular basis, come up with a presentation package, perhaps something approaching a half-hour presentation for a thorough package, PowerPoint perhaps, again covering everything that has been discussed and decided by the commission up to that point in time, and then perhaps a elevator speech version, let's say a 5-minute version, so that if a radio calls you up and don't give you any time, at least you're ready to repeat that message, and in essence containing the bulk of the same message in the major presentation package. So that does involve a little bit of preparation ahead of time in terms of making an effort to very concisely and carefully summarize. Perhaps this could be part of the staff activity, but it also could be our activity as well. So that perhaps would be one way in terms of allowing all of us to speak to the press with a uniform voice.
And I would suggest that the practical context for all interviews is an opportunity for community outreach, so that within whatever statement we draw up, whether it's written or understood to be delivered in a standard way, that we should make as one might say, a shout out for community participation, and use this as an advocacy piece for participating in the process.
Right.
Also that, of course, we're communicating in English right now, but that those of us that are bilingual or multilingual, that we certainly have a very special role to play in outreaching with media outlets that are language specific to those types of communities. So it's a daunting task, but we can do it. We can organize it. I'm glad we're having this discussion because it's a very important piece.
Yeah, I think it'll be easier when the outreach committee has established a schedule, and so when people try to give us redistricting information, we can say, please come to the next hearing.
All right, until such time the outreach committee is in place, Stan, would you like to move, or would you like to make a motion to adapt a certain set of practices?
I think that the motion I would make is that it will be our practice as a whole commission to prepare at the end of our commission meetings, and it's multiple days and it's the end of the multiple day, a statement as to what we have achieved and what we've talked about and decisions we've made, so that we all have the same piece of information on which to base any media contacts that we have. And I do think, and I think that you're correct, that we should, in every opportunity, I mean, this is part of it too, I think, at every opportunity we need to encourage the public to participate. And that needs to be part of every meeting's message. That's a lengthy motion. A little speech in the middle.
Well, I'll shorten it and second it.
It's moved and second, so let me, at this point, open up the floor mic to the public. If the public would like to chime in on this discussion or make further suggestions or comment on what we have discussed, please come up to the microphone. All right, seeing no one approaching the mic, I'll bring it back to the commission for further discussion initially. Any additional comments? Mike?
I'm just curious, who's going to be responsible for creating that?
I would suggest that our community affairs, public affairs officer would probably be responsible for creating that in conjunction with the Public Information Committee.
But who's going to do it today for this set of meetings?
I did it last time, so.
You did such a good job.
I was going to volunteer Commissioner Ward to do that.
Great, thank you. And as far as the Public Information Committee, do we envision that all media contact be reported to them?
Again, I would suggest that we coordinate that through staff, and that this committee is formed to work with the staff person who will be responsible for dealing with media relations.
Okay, I'm just wondering if this motion is going to in any way help streamline what media contact. So again, kind of like Ms. Wilkins-Weber was saying, we don't have a shotgun approach to our media outreach, but more of a controlled, targeted effort. I'm wondering what device we can build into this motion to help ensure that.
Well, that was the purpose of having us prepare a statement at the end of our meetings, so we all have a consistent message.
So that tailors the message well. How about media contact?
I think at this point it's more media contacting us.
Yeah.
It's not. That's really with my concern. I think when we have our committee in place and our staff to handle it as well, that it'll go the other way. But I think this is for our current situation, I think.
Yeah, I mean, once we have a public information officer, then believe me, the media will be contacting that person. I mean, we're all getting individually contacted right now because there's no staff in place. So
Sure.
there are a lot of things that are happening now because we're not quite set up yet.
Okay. I was just wondering if we wanted to build any of the definition for that media contact into this motion or not.
I wouldn't
So
do it
at this
yet.
point, we can all go ahead and respond to those requests at will with the guidance of a press release. Okay. Okay.
Want to elaborate on public information? That I know that this is technical, and this will probably take care of itself when we have our communications or public information officer. But this involves also the creation of brochures and distribution materials that we'll all agree upon, that staff will certainly take care of with the budget, the accompanying budget to go with it. Okay, just wanted to be clear.
Which
What we
might mean
mean
it's
and
all
define as
electronic on the
public.
website.
Okay. All right, just wanted to clarify that.
All right, seeing that the discussion has come to a halt, let's do a roll call on this motion that's before us.
Yes.
Commissioner Baraba?
Yes.
Commissioner Blanco? Commissioner Dye?
Yes.
Commissioner DeGiulio?
Yes.
Commissioner Filkins-Weber?
Yes.
Commissioner Forbes?
Yes.
Commissioner Galumbo Malloy? Commissioner Quo? Commissioner Antai?
Aye.
Commissioner Parvenu?
Yes.
Commissioner Rye?
Yes.
Commissioner Ward?
Yes.
Commissioner Yao?
Yes. All right, this motion passes because we have a unanimous amount, those who are present. All right, next item on the governance
Peter,
issue.
everybody was handed out a little flow chart, and I think this is maybe a complementary to the discussion.
Could you speak a little closer to the mic, please?
This is very consistent with the discussion we just had on committees. And in this case, if there was a technical committee, which we've agreed we ought to have, this is an example of how we might be able to have a small group with specific capabilities in place to respond to the needs of the entire commission. And in this, this initial thoughts, and this is not a proposal, this is just to get the conversation started. So we would, in essence, we've already committed to conduct these outreach programs, and that would to determine what citizens' preferences are. And then based on that, our commission defines preferences into alternative ways of looking at redistricting. The technical committee then would identify alternative ways of responding to those requests, which the CRC then could engage with the outreach as to what do you think about what we just put together. And the important thing here is you see a bunch of return flows, because my guess is the experience we'll have, particularly initially, is that, no, that's not what we meant, or now that I see what you've done, oh, wait, no, I think we ought to do it another way. And so this technical committee should be in a position to be very responsive to the kinds of questions they're going to be raising. And I think this will happen to all the committees. We should be positioned to make sure that the commission is the one who gives the direction to the committee. Then the committee responds to the commission, and the commission says, yes, you heard us right, or now that you've explained something to me, I think we ought to change the direction. And at that point, then it's up to the commission to go back to the outreach program and say, this is the direction we plan to be taking, and get reaction to that. And then based on that reaction, then we would come up with the best solution to the approach. And I think to the point that was made by Commissioner Dye is that when these requests are made of a particular committee, you're not going to have to get all 14 people in the room each time a change. You need a group of people who can get something done real quickly. And that's why I think, and you don't have to the extent to which we can't avoid some of the video, streaming video and things of that nature on some of these activities while you're coming up with possible solutions that I think will facilitate our ability to move forward.
I have one question, Commissioner Baraba. The fourth box, which indicates following the initial outreach, then your preferences, and then going to the technical team, for instance, what you have here to identify alternative maps. And then the fourth box where you're stating that CRC engages in another outreach program to gain citizen reaction to alternatives. That's the only box that I believe we might have some concern about, because we are obviously going to be presenting the maps. I don't know if we're considering the first set, let's say, and get public, comment on. In other words, I guess my point is that it looks like you're going back to the same outreach plan that you're considering in box one, which appears to be duplicative. I'm worried about budgetary concerns. Are you suggesting some other alternative in box four? What are you really looking at there in that you're not duplicating efforts from box one?
Yeah, this does not necessarily mean that we'd have to go out and have a bunch of community meetings. This could be through publicity, through the website. We would go to the outreach the public information team and say, okay, what's the most effective way of letting them know the direction that we're taking? So it doesn't have to be a whole traditional outreach as you would have in box one.
I just want to comment that I'm not sure, though, that we shouldn't do that. I've just been pondering that as to whether, in order to really make the public feel like they're engaged, is that we don't, when we decide how many places we're actually going to, that we basically double schedule each location, once to hear their initial input and once to go back to show them how we incorporated what we think they said, and give them a chance to actually comment on it. I think to ask them to a website is hard.
Well, and that's why I think we have to sit down, and that's why I have the box there, is that we haven't figured out how we're going to do it. We just know that we have to let people know that we heard them and make sure that they understand that what we brought forward is really reflective of what they asked for.
Mm-hmm. One other topic I'd like to bring up. And
let's stay on this topic until we bring it to a conclusion.
Got silence.
This I interpret as a set of guidelines given to the outreach committee initially. Is this something that you want to consider as an overall project planning process? What is your intent in discussing this flow at this point in time?
The reason I put it together for my own purposes was that my feeling that I'd like to participate in the technical committee, and in doing that, I was trying to figure out how I could do that in such a way that it would be responsive to the request of the entire commission. Whether this would apply to other committees, that's up to us to decide. But it's one way of thinking about how we might want to go about using this committee structure to make sure that the commission is thoroughly involved in all activities.
The commissioners, how would you want to discuss this redistricting process? Is this, shall we basically take one model at a time and discuss it, or do we want to agendize it at a future meeting so that we come up with a definitive model that we can concur and proceed? I guess I'm trying to think out loud as to how we want to move forward with this process flow concept.
Well, it seems to me that item 8 on our agenda would be the place to talk about that. Discussion and action regarding redistricting matters. That's where I talk about that.
Yeah. I think
Okay,
this is
so
a-
you
I
want
think
to
this is a
further
good start.
expand on the process during item number 8?
That's what I would do.
All right.
Why don't we take what Commissioner Bravas has already created here, and maybe we can put it into agenda item number 8, and this would be a good model to start with, and it might be in conjunction at some point, as well as the subcommittees get them, as they understand their task and how those are going to be taking place, those can also fit into whatever model is created.
Mr. Baraba, since we're going to discuss it in greater detail in item number 8, are there any objectives you want to accomplish as part of the commission governance?
No, I just
topic?
wanted to get it out on the table in essence for discussion and as a way of thinking about it.
All right.
I don't think we need to take any action.
All right. All right, thank you. Mr. Forbes?
Yes, thank you. When we were the band of 8, Commissioner Ray brought up what I think is an important consideration for all of us, and that was how we're going to score our per diem evaluation. I mean, the advice I got from counsel at the State Auditor's Office was that it's sort of the honor system, and it's up to you to decide whether to put in time or not. For the public, we are each paid $300 a day that we spend on commission business, but just what a day is somewhat flexible, shall we say. And so Commissioner Ray had brought up the issue that she wanted to be sure that the public was going to get its money's worth. So I just wanted to sort of see whether we wanted to, in our own minds, I mean, it's not going to be a rigid thing, but in our own minds, what we think we should be doing to justify our per diem.
Well, yeah, I brought it up kind of looking at it from the point of view as a business owner, and you are too, what I would consider a minimum workday, considering, of course, people have lunch, they take breaks, they chit-chat a little bit, whatever it is. A little harder to do when each of us is out back in our own office or home doing the things we need to do in preparation for the meetings. It's obviously easy to measure what a day is when we're all sitting here for many, many more hours than a regular workday might actually be. But my thought was that 6 hours, and not necessarily in one day, but I've been trying to look at it for myself cumulatively. So when I reach 6 hours, then I say, okay, I have a day, and try to account for it in that way. I think anything less is, in my opinion, just not right. But maybe somebody disagrees.
Having worked in a corporate environment for 30-some years, the standard I have always adhered to, by the way, I worked for the same company for 30-some years, so there's only one standard I'm familiar with, is that if on a given day, a day is defined as a work day, if we exceed 4 hours of activity, then the corporation would allow us to define that as a full work day. Anything short of it, you basically get 0. It doesn't carry over to the next day or anything as such. It's very well defined. On Monday, if you did 3.5 hours in, then you're not qualified to be compensated for anything associated with it. If you exceed 4 hours, then you're entitled to receive benefit. things including meals and things of this nature. So that's the environment I grew up with, and I found it to be a reasonable set of guidelines. So you want to consider that. I would offer that as a model.
Well, the only reason I find that somewhat, the reason I looked at it as sort of accumulating hours is that, for example, when we were reviewing the Band of Six, you know, I would be at work. I mean, I would be doing my work, and then I would set aside 2 hours. Okay, I'm going to shift gears here. I'm going to spend 2 hours doing what I need to do for the commission. And then I'd go back to doing my work, and then in the evening, maybe I'd spend 2 more hours. So I had a long work day, but it was not a long commission work day, in my opinion. So then the next day, I'd put in 2 hours, and that's when I would draw the line. To me, it's like I'm looking at it, just trying to look at it as, I don't think 4 hours, honestly, 4 hours, that doesn't sit right with me, 4 hours as a day. But that's, you know, just to explain, you know, we're not in a structure like you are in your job. So that's why I tried to think of a number that was 8 hours. That's, you know, that's really a lot, but 6 to me fits with my concept of a work day.
Yeah, and I think the idea of accumulating is important for us because we are citizen commissioners, and most of us, I mean, several of us own businesses and other people have jobs, and we are trying to fit this in. So I think we're going to need the flexibility to look at an hour here, 2 hours there, what have you. But, you know, personally, when I'm, you know, I check email, you know, I'm not going to count the 15 minutes I looked at email one day as a day. I mean, that's ridiculous. So I do a similar kind of math in my head and kind of thinking, okay, yeah, you know, over the last week I've put in so many hours, and do I count that as a day or two or what have you?
And Peter, I think the notion of accumulating is good because it's easier to document it and say that I put in 2 hours of these, and then 4 the next. Oh, that's one day, and then move on to the next accumulation. So I would support that notion of Commissioner Ryan.
In this discussion, and obviously the manner in which it is identified on the agenda, are we, or was it Commissioner Forbes' intent just to open up this discussion so we have a general understanding, or was there going to be any action regarding proposed guidelines that the commission members should consider?
Actually, my intent was to actually end up with a standard that we would adopt. Not so much that, you know, for our purposes, but again, I think that we need, as a Citizens Commission, to demonstrate to the public that they're going to get their money's worth in a formal way. So I'll let you make the motion.
Then I do have one other.
Okay.
Based on your response to my question, then I certainly agree with Commissioner Dye that I like a cumulative fashion as well. That's somewhat what I have been doing primarily because as she as well, I am also, you know, full-time, working full-time and certainly set aside possibly an hour or 2 or maybe even up to 3 and can't get to necessarily a 6 hours or maybe even 4 hours in one day. So I certainly like the cumulative fashion, and in my experience, based as an hourly and paid defense attorney, I do bill on 6-minute increments, but I do. And most of my career I have done that as well. But looking at that, my experience also has been in looking at my practice and looking at the day, what constitutes a day, and even working with my clients. I have also, in my experience with many of the firms that I have also worked for and in my current position, looked at 4 hours also as being a generally set standard as a day. Have no objection to us extending it to 6 if we look at a cumulative nature, and that's just my opinion on that. Thank you.
Well, then I will move that we adopt as, excuse me, a standard for our per diem compensation that each accumulation of 6 hours spent on commission business, and as I'm saying this, something else is occurring to me. Okay, let's try. It constitutes a day and that each day spent in public session constitutes a day. Okay.
I second that.
I'd like to further define, okay, in addition to the quantitative aspect of what a day is in terms of the number, in terms of qualitative, the types of activities that would constitute what work is. I know in preparing for this session, I spent hours reading background materials, and I don't know whether or not that's considered working, doing commission-related work. Of course, phone calls or preparing documents or creating a tangible product, of course, would constitute what commission work is. Phone calls, radio, appearances, preparing documents. It's still sort of vague to me as to what we collectively defined as work. I read on my own. I'll read documents on California or newspapers, internet. Is that working, doing commission-related work, or is that just casual, leisurely reading? Or something that I'm just doing because I just want to educate myself or be aware? Or is that actually commission-related work, per se? I'm still a bit vague as to what we collectively view as work and what's attributed towards the end product, which is producing these 4 maps on time. I'm fine with the motion. I just want to leave this session with a clear definition of what work is.
From my perspective, what I've seen and what I've personally put down on my per diem is when we were obligated to take particular action based on decisions made by the commission as a whole. For instance, reviewing executive director applications. But personal education on matters to familiarize yourself. For instance, obviously I did legal research, to address some of the issues concerning this act. I did not bill for that. Well, that's my terminology as a lawyer, but I did not consider that. I felt that we all come to this commission with each of our own individual interests. So from my perspective, it's obviously travel, obviously commission meetings, obviously necessary information or documentation presented to us, reviewing public comments, reviewing emails related to business versus, discussing other personal matters such as, where we might meet or a hotel or something like that. But I think educating yourself does not necessarily, I wouldn't consider that inclusive among commission business, because that's far-reaching, and we certainly may feel, I personally feel that I do want to look into quite a few other matters, but I don't feel that it's something that we should bill to the commission, primarily because if we were required to have that knowledge before, maybe we wouldn't all be here. But I don't think it's financially and fiscally responsible to charge the commission for things that you're going to educate yourself on. So I'd be looking at general directives from this commission and the work that you perform in achieving those objectives, either in your individual committee meetings and not personal education.
I would.
Oh, you want here.
Thanks. Yeah, I'd just like to add that certainly we had training yesterday. There are some educational exposure, educational things that need to be done that would be, to me, appropriate to put on the dole. I also think that like you said, if we apply just customary standards from corporate standards and military standards, you kind of answered the question. If you're doing leisure reading, that's leisure reading. If you're doing work in support of the commission, it's just that. There's no way to nail down every task that we can see down the road coming. There's no way to define and spell that out. But ultimately, I would see it very simply defined as if you're task that you're doing, what you're accomplishing, is in direct support of a commission business, that's work. You know, if it's not, if it's a personal pursuit or personal interest or an area that you feel you need to bone up on, whatever the case may be, well, you know, that would be that would not be. It seems like that's a pretty good standard without, like I said, trying to nail down every specific task or every possible situation. You know, is it or is it not billable?
I just want to say something, I guess, a little more on the philosophical side about this, because it's not as simple as the paycheck you collect at your job. But you know, we all came into this out of a conviction that it was an important task to accomplish for the benefit of the state, of the citizens of the state. We've all done volunteer work before. And usually not one where you do get a per diem, but you know, we've all done volunteer work, and you know that there are just some things you go into, and you go into them because you have that passion, which is what Cynthia looks for, and a commitment to it. And so, you know, there's some sacrifices you're going to make. It may be the fact that you're away from home. It may be the fact that you're not tending to your own business or employment. But that's the choice we made. We also came into it, I think, with, you know, a certain amount. We came into it with certain skills, with some with, you know, different levels of background information. And I think that's just incumbent on us as individuals to make sure that we are prepared to do the job, whatever that takes. But we're all in a different place, so there's absolutely no way to measure, you know, how much math I would have to study, or maybe, you know, somebody else, you know, having to become more familiar with the law or something. But that's just, you know, we're sort of thrown into this, and I think I think our biggest responsibility is to make the most of the budget we have and you know, take it from there.
I don't know if this clarifies it or not, but this is sort of my test. If I'm simply curious or I'm simply interested, that doesn't go on the clock. If it furthers the specific goal, there's a better nexus, using a good legal word, a better nexus between what I'm doing and the commission work, then, you know, it goes on the clock.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
All right, there's a motion on the floor, and it's been seconded in terms of defining how we should submit our per diem. Does anybody need any further clarification on that? All right, if not, then let me open up the discussion to, let's leave it there for the time being, to the audience. Would anybody like to comment on the per diem definition that we have proposed? All right, if not, let's do a voice vote on the motion that's on the floor.
Commissioner Aguirre?
Yes.
Commissioner Baraba?
Yes.
Commissioner Blanco? Commissioner Dye?
Yes.
Commissioner DeGiulio?
Yes.
Commissioner Filkins-Weber?
Yes.
Commissioner Forbes?
Yes.
Commissioner Galambos Malloy? Commissioner Quo? Commissioner Antai?
Aye.
Commissioner Parvenu?
Yes.
Commissioner Rye?
Yes.
Commissioner Ward?
Yes.
Commissioner Yao?
Yes. All right, 4 times in a row, we got a unanimous vote on by those who are present. All right, any other item that we want to discuss in terms of the commission governance?
I
Cynthia?
just want to suggest a practical thing to implement the committee membership is that each commissioner kind of jot down which committee or committees you're interested in participating in, and also which ones you are willing to participate in. So I want to clarify, because some you may be personally interested in, some you may have the skills for and are willing to be tapped. And then we can ask staff to assist us and make sure we have the right composition for the committees.
Shall we come back this afternoon, Friday, and pin down the membership? All right, thank you. Any additional items?
Actually, I was going to suggest that we, today, give staff the numbers, so tomorrow we can see how well we do, and if we have to juggle the membership.
Or even this afternoon.
Or even this afternoon, like I've got mine down.
All right, give your input to Ann ASAP.
Yeah, have we considered whether, I don't know what type of contact we have with the other two commissioners that are out of the country and whether they've been responding via email, but if it was possible to shoot them a quick email that we've passed this committee, advisory committee structure, and see if we happen to get a response from them this afternoon, that might be helpful to fill it out further.
Actually, Commissioner Blanco is unavailable, and Commissioner Malloy is traveling today, so she's unavailable as well.
Okay, thank you.
Who applied the corporate rule, they're absent, they're on the committee.
They will be assigned. They will be volunteered.
I may be a bit forward here, but would it be possible for us to at least go down the row here and see what committees that we would be interested in, so we have at least, if not official record, that we have a general record of what each and every one of us are at least leaning towards in terms of these subcommittees? Can we do that before we move on this?
Sorry. All right, for the Finance Administrative Subcommittee, just raise your hand. Maybe staff can read off the name and for the
Could we
record.
could we ask you to just raise your hand and speak your name just to be sure we got it?
All right, raise your hand and speak your name.
I would be interested. Gil, Antai?
Peter Yao?
Peter Yao.
Michelle DeGiulio?
Michelle?
Cynthia Dye?
And, no? Okay. I'm sorry, I thought your hand went up. I understand that completely. That's why I went to law school. I can't make 2 and 2 fit.
Technical Advisory Committee?
Vince Baraba.
Andre Parvenu.
Got it.
And Peter Yao.
And Peter? Got Peter? Okay.
The Outreach Subcommittee?
Commissioner Filkins Weber.
Commissioner Forbes?
Commissioner Antai?
Commissioner DeGiulio?
Commissioner Andre Parvenu.
Have we maxed out? I mean, I think we have so many of us interested.
How many don't want to be on that?
Yeah, I was going to say, I want to be clear that, I was trying to be clear before that this is the committee that would do the planning for it, because I expect all of us to be actually
Yeah,
doing the outreach,
participating.
so that might help.
Because how many people do we have already?
Everybody.
Everybody.
I don't have to be on that committee.
Planning Commissioner
Let's,
Filkins Weber.
on that committee, let's let Ann read off the names that we managed to scribble down and see who we missed.
Okay, I have Commissioner Filkins Weber, Commissioner Forbes, Commissioner Antai, Commissioner DeGiulio, Commissioner Parvenu,
Okay.
and Commissioner...
I would, Commissioner Raya, I'd like to be on that.
And Ryan. And-
Yeah,
And Commissioner Aguirre.
yeah,
Oh.
And Commissioner Dye.
yeah. So we'll probably want to make some decisions because that's going to be too big.
Yeah.
Commissioner Ward?
Maybe we'll be able to pare it down to a smaller number of people who will take input from everybody else who's interested rather than...
Or maybe we should break it up, different
Well,
aspects
we
of
have the
outreach.
input. Let's take
Yeah.
time out and discuss it the next time we
Yeah,
touch on this
not at
topic.
this
Let's
moment,
don't
but, yeah.
try to work it out at this moment. The legal subcommittee,
Commissioner Filkins Weber.
Forbes. Commissioner Ward.
We need a
Technically, yeah,
Democrat.
we would need a Democrat.
We have another lawyer.
Okay. Okay, I'm in.
no pressure.
Yeah, really. Since I'll probably get booted from outreach.
Sometimes you serve, sometimes you.
There you go.
Okay, last certainly not least, the Public Information Subcommittee.
Commissioner Baraba. Forbes.
Parvenu.
Raya?
Commissioner Ward.
I won't do the public information, but could I maybe switch to technical then? I know Andre's already there, but would that be possible to do technical? And I'll forfeit public information.
My only concern about the technical committee, given the requirements, if you got more than 2 people on it, it's going to really slow down our ability to respond to inquiries. And it just seemed to me that if we could limit it to 2, that we would be in a much better position to respond quickly rather than having to publish everything that we're going to do. So I would ask the commission to consider that as a possibility.
You mean more than 2? I thought we said that we'd have at least 1 from each. Oh, you mean more than 1 in a count?
No, I meant no more than 2 people, so we're excluded from the...
No, I think we decided that we'd have at least 1 from each.
Yeah, I am asking an exception from that, because of the need to respond quickly rather than having to publish everything that we...
In the technical group, you already have 4, though.
That's what I'm concerned
okay.
about, yeah.
So, all right, I could, well, I don't know if you wanted to address that to the other commissioners.
Yeah. I thought we'd bring it up in the public.
Who were the 4 again?
But
For technical,
Correct.
Commissioner Baraba, Commissioner Parvenu, Commissioner Aguirre, Commissioner Yao.
Maybe
All right,
I should
I'll-
ask with the technical side, though, part of that, maybe we should define what technical is a little bit, because as I understood Commissioner Stye's description of it was not just the implementation of the technical side, but also the looking at the who the technical consultants will be and reviewing some of the material. And it's not just the actual.
Well, we could set up 2 committees, one to have a broader aspect over the look at how we go structure, but then have a subcommittee, if we could do that, of the just 2 people who will respond to inquiries. That might be one way.
Inquiries being.
Or you mean?
In the sense of this flow chart. Somebody says, I'd like to see what happens if we did this. Let's see what the map would look like.
But any changes to a map will have to be done, it won't be done by the committee.
It's not a change to the map, it's a response to an inquiry about a map.
So you just say, thank you, we've gotten your response, and we'll bring it to the commission?
No, we get it from the commission only, and then as soon as somebody asks for us, you give them a look at it, rather than having to post it in 14 days that we're going to bring this back to you in 14 days. I mean, which is going to make it impossible to move at any speed.
But maybe I'm losing, I understand, if I'm understanding you correctly, it's that if there's a change, someone proposes a change, and you're saying if there's just 2 commissioners, then they'll be able, those 2 individuals can physically make a change on the map, and that can happen without the prior notice.
Yes.
But maybe I'm misunderstanding. I thought that the whole commission would take a look at any suggestions for changes, and as a group, we would make the change, decide whether or not that was a change that wanted to be made.
We would be providing you the wherewithal to make that judgment.
May I ask a question? When Commissioner Dye first went through this list,
Yeah.
she said, select mapping software and consultants. So to me, that's kind of a setup process, not the ongoing. So I'd like
Yeah.
to know for sure what the technical committee has proposed to do.
Yeah, let me clarify, because Commissioner Baraba, you might recall that the commission got advice from the Arizona commissioner before about that the commission itself should not actually move any lines, and that should all be done through consultants. And I thought that was actually pretty wise counsel. So I didn't intend for the commissioners to actually be doing that, but to select the consultants that we would hire to implement the changes. and respond to inquiries, because they don't have any notice requirements.
My only goal is to make sure that we get a quick answer to questions and to avoid the need, and not that you decide on the issue, but that you get information upon which you can decide.
Which we can ask our consultants to do with no notice at all.
So maybe going back to this original committee, we could say that that aspect of whether it would be a subcommittee of two of the commission at a later date, or would be the consultants, maybe that's a discussion even for, yeah.
Of
for
the broader committee.
Of the broader
Yeah, I
committee.
think that'd be fine.
So for now, we can just limit it to the, again, software, technical outreach, maybe even the aspects of the, any type of meeting setups, things like that. Would that be, okay. So with that, can I be back on the committee?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Let's see, I think that modified decision on the initial 5 committees. Would you like to make a?
No, I think we
No.
keep it as it is,
No.
and then that committee can make a decision on how we're going to respond to inquiries.
All right, all right. It is necessary for us to break it around 11:30 to take care of some of the computer technical issues. So we have about 15 minutes left between now and 11:30. Instead of starting on the next agenda item of scheduling, we can do that. Are there any other general topics associated with the governance that you want to discuss? Yes.
Yes, before we move forward, I'd just like to emphasize the need for what I would consider a strong budgetary allocation for the outreach process. There's been comments about limited resources, and one of my fellow commissioners mentioned that perhaps we might only get as far as the network, the internet, and that would be good for some Californians, but there's a significant population that do not have access to the internet and thereby would be excluded. And the only way to fix that would be to relook at the outreach plan and make sure that we have multiple avenues for communicating with the public and informing them about the process.
Would that be part of the charter of the Finance Administration Subcommittee, or would you want this entire commission to address that topic?
I just wanted to get it on the record because, we need to approach the powers that be and emphasize the importance of the outreach aspect of the process.
Thank you. Any additional topics you want to discuss in the next 10, 15 minutes on the general heading of the commission governance? All right, I think it's probably more appropriate to break at this point in time as compared to starting and stopping in the middle of the next discussion, which would be the scheduling. Yes.
Commissioner Yao, could we go through the committees, the subcommittee list one more time?
Sure.
Okay, on the Finance Committee, we have Commissioner Antai, Commissioner Yao, Commissioner DeGiulio, Commissioner Dai. Technical Committee, we have Commissioner Baraba, Commissioner Parvenu, Commissioner Aguirre, Commissioner Yao, Commissioner DeGiulio. Outreach, we have Commissioner Filkins-Weber, Commissioner Forbes, Commissioner Antai, Commissioner Rai, Commissioner Aguirre, Commissioner Dai. Legal, we have Commissioner Filkins-Weber, Commissioner Forbes, Commissioner Ward, Commissioner Rai. Public Relations, we have Commissioner Baraba, Commissioner Aguirre, Commissioner Forbes, Commissioner Parvenu, Commissioner Rai, Commissioner Ward. Is that correct?
Thank you.
I think the answer is yes. I'm sorry. Mike?
I believe you left Commissioner Ward off the outreach list.
Outreach or public relations?
Outreach.
Outreach or public relations?
Both.
Both, yeah.
Okay.
So we'll probably look at maybe splitting the outreach function into 2 or something like that. So that might be something we want to talk about.
North and south.
We still have 3 commissioners
Three.
that aren't here, so.
Right.
They will weigh in also.
All right, could I request that you come back that when we meet again with either 1 or 2 sentence encompassing what you think is the statement of work associated with each of the subcommittee? Just one member of
Each committee.
each subcommittee can just maybe take time out to draft a sentence or 2 for us all to understand and
I'll do
consider.
legal, so I'll put a statement together as to what I believe I understand unless
right.
you're asking Commissioner Dye to do it, but you
All
said.
right. It,
No.
I'll volunteer to do a
I don't think we
statement.
necessarily need to decide who's to do it. Just
Yeah.
one of you.
Oh, okay.
Take time out to write a sentence, and at least that'll be a straw man statement of work, a straw man
Charter.
charter for each of the commissions when we come back and discuss this. I guess maybe we do not need to discuss this further, or do we? I think we will have to talk about the schedule for the.
Yeah, when
So
we talk
at that
about
point in
this-
time, maybe that'll be an appropriate time to just have a look on paper as to what we think the statement of work is for each of the subcommittee.
And keep in mind, when we do adjourn this session, that we will need to have proper agendized, issues for this committee too. So maybe when we consider preparing this charter, I guess, for lack of a better word, that you keep in mind that maybe what the agenda description will be for each of these committees, so we provide proper notice at this point, even though we may not have a specific designated date for the meeting of these committees, but maybe provide public notice as to what the
Topic.
anticipated topics would be
Right,
for
right.
scheduled agendas.
Right. All right, would anybody like to, let me comment as to what the rest of the day is like. We're going to adjourn very shortly for a break, not only a lunch break, but to take care of some of the computer issues. And then we're going to go into closed session when we reconvene. And we'll come out of the closed session anticipated to be around 4 p.m. today. And at that point in time, we can either start on the scheduling discussion if we get out early enough. If not, then we'll start that first thing tomorrow. So if there are no other matters to address before the break, are there any?
No, I just wanted to know, you're coming back into open session again before we go into closed session, correct?
We have to do we need
Then,
to do that?
if we're going to closed session right after the break, then you just need to announce that again
Read the statement.
and include in the announcement to the public the statutory
Okay, thank
section.
you. So it is not necessary for us to report back on the closed session because we are going to have an open session first thing tomorrow morning. Is that not correct?
No, you need to come back sometime before 5. Come back in open session, just report that you've been in closed session and in just a general way what you've done.
Correct. I think that was the intent of my announcement, is that we'll likely be coming out of closed session at around 4 p.m. this afternoon. We may or may not start with our next agenda item on the open session. If not, then we're going to start that first thing tomorrow, and then we'll go into closed session again tomorrow.
Yeah, that's fine. As long as you, just as long as you announce before you go in
Right.
and you come back on the record, if
Okay.
you will, in open session after you're done, each time.
All right. All right, so we're going to take a break from the open session at this point in time, and starting immediately after lunch, we're going to go into a closed session per Government Code Section 11126A-1. Topic is consideration of personnel matters, evaluation of candidates for commission staff positions. All right, so we'll break at this point and see everybody back here at 1 p.m. or 1:30, I forgot. 1:15.
1:15 would be fine, but please stay until we get your laptops squared
Correct,
away.
correct. All right, thank you very much. You have to load this off.